Good evening. Fall River Community Media is pleased to sponsor tonight's forum featuring the candidates running for Fall River City Council. My name is Keith Tebow, Director of FRC Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator for tonight's event. This is the second of our two City Council forums tonight. All candidates were invited to participate, and the makeup of our two panels was determined via a drawing. The candidates joining us tonight for our second panel are, in alphabetical order, Stephen Camara, Tim Cole, Colin Dias, Pamela Liberty LeBeau, Trot Lee, Christopher Peckham, Linda Pereira, and Cliff Ponte. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Also joining us is a panel of journalists that will be asking the questions of the candidates tonight. Joining us are Michael Sylvia of the Fall River Reporter, Phil Devitt from the Herald News, Pam Martin from FRG TV, Alan Zarek of WSAR, and Don Amata from FRC TV. Our timekeeper tonight from FRC Media is Lucy Cabral, also sitting with our panelists tonight. The format of tonight's forum is as follows. Our event will last 90 minutes. There will be no opening statements, but each candidate will be allowed a 90-second closing statement. Each candidate will answer every question posed by our panelists and will have 90 seconds to answer each question. There will be no rebuttals. Prior to each question, we will randomly draw a candidate's name, and that candidate will respond to the question first. We'll then work our way around the rest of the candidates so everyone has an opportunity to answer the question. Candidates will only be asked to answer a question first once. In the event that all candidates were not selected to answer a question first, there will be another drawing from those remaining to determine who will give his or her closing statement first. We are ready to go. We'll get right to our first question. It'll be asked by Michael Sylvia from the Fall River Reporter, and will be answered first by Stephen Camara.
So my question depends on if you're an incumbent or a non-incumbent. So for incumbents, since you've been on the City Council, what accomplishments are you most proud of? For the non-incumbents, what's the number one thing you hope to accomplish if you're elected to the City Council?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Keith, and FRC Media for sponsoring this event. Before beginning, I'd like to wish Tim Cole a happy birthday. Thank you. Yeah, over the years, I've participated in many issues. I'm most proud, though, of what I've done over the last 9 months, specifically as it relates to forming and asking the council president to form and forming in conjunction with the council president a task force to consider how we govern. As an urban policy analyst and as a political scientist, I've studied government both academically and now through decades of service, both as a school committee member and as a city councilor. And I am convinced that it's time for us to consider a city manager form of government. We've had over the last decade turmoil and turnover, and the lack of stability in governing is a cost to all of us. So, this 7-member committee, a very diverse committee composed of school committee member, community activists, business people, studied over 9 months various city manager forms of government in Lowell, Worcester, Cambridge. We had people brought in, and we looked at the possibility. I'm most proud now that we've submitted a proposal that sits in the Ordinance Committee and hopefully will be forthcoming soon. So that comes first. And now to a very specific...
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Sure. So as a non-incumbent, my number one priority for accomplishment would be to develop a stronger system for our homeless and opioid addicts. I have been advertising in my campaign materials that I'd like to put together a volunteer to work program for the homeless and addicted. I believe that this program can work in terms of, for one, bettering the city. So the idea is that they would volunteer to help out, enroll in a program that could provide them with some funds at the completion of the program. The idea is the funds might be used to be a down payment, or like a first or last month's rent security deposit or something on an apartment. in combination in doing this, I think part of the funding can come from signs that I would like to have advertising, saying something like, you know, Fall River Cares, please don't feed the habit. Donate your, or send your donations to the homeless and addicted to this dedicated text number. I think that would help alleviate some of the panhandling and provide some funding for the program. I believe that we need to have prevention, stronger prevention, early intervention, and recovery for both of these problems.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
Thank you for the question, Mike. As a non-incumbent, one priority I would wish to work on to accomplish is actually restoring honest government to our community. And I actually have a 4-point plan to do so. One, which is a ban on political donations by City Hall employees within City Hall. A second would be common sense term limits for city councilors. When I say common sense, which I mean is my vision for that would be a councilor, incumbent councilor, can run for 2 consecutive terms, and then they must take a 2-year moratorium. So therefore, we have an influx of new people, new ideas, fresh ideas, and we can move the community forward. And at the same time, councilors who do a great job with the community can continue to serve after the 2-year moratorium. Third would be an independent ethics review team. I know there's been a lot of talk about the lack of transparency with the last administration, and I want to see a complete review of what went wrong and how we can go forward in the future and what steps we need to take. And lastly would be a blind hiring process. I believe an individual should be hired based on what they know and what their experience is and what their resume holds in, and not who they know in the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Elizabeth LeBeau.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike, for the question. I am very proud as an incumbent to always be a champion for our public safety, for our police and fire and EMS, for not only personnel but equipment that they need. It's something that I originally campaigned on and have continued through 2 terms. Through this last term, I was finally able to get the street sweeping program up and operating, which wasn't easy as we went through 4 different DCM directors. So every time someone came in, we had to start all over again. It went through a pilot program and now is an up and running system. And it was done and implemented properly with the help of DCM and the traffic director. But I've worked with Heart to Hope on getting them a homeless drop-in center. And right now I'm working on a policy that would go through any administration. It would continue on an inclement weather policy for a warming center or a center where government center would open, and how that would operate, whether it's 110 degrees or a hurricane or 6 inches of snow for our homeless residents. It's something I'm passionate about. But what I think I'm most proud of over the last 4 years is how accessible I have been to the residents of Fall River, answering any questions and concerns that they have, whether it's a pothole or something major. That it doesn't matter if it's big or small. To them, it's important. So I pride myself on being very accessible to the residents.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Hello, thank you for having me and thank you for the question. I'd like to point out that our city has probably been about at least 30 to 25 years behind environmentally. We're always behind this bar when we talk about our environment, we talk about the recycling, we talk about every single thing that we've done, contaminated landfills, you name it, we've been behind the bar. I believe that the purple bag situation has not resolved all our problems, whether we kept them or whether we got rid of them when it comes to the environment. We have a lot of problems still. Street sweeper program is back, but we have a lot of problems with our littering. We have needles all over the street. I plan on being a city councilor that goes after addressing environmental needs in the community. I'd like to implement a composting program. I'd like to revamp how we get rid of our waste altogether. Right now, we have our yard composting going to Tiverton. We have our recycling going to Connecticut, $100 a ton. It's costly. It's not good for our environment, and I would love to accomplish and have everyone involved in the process as well of making Fall River a more environmentally conscious and environmentally safe community. Thank you.
Mr. Pickham.
Yes, great question. Excuse me. Something that I would like to tackle, if I get the chance to be elected, like Mr. Cole said, opiate addiction holds a very special place in my heart. I've mentioned it many, many times over the course of my campaign so far. Come from a heroin-addicted family. Over the past 20-some-odd years, I've watched my brother struggle and enter rehab, enter detox, and it failed over and over and over again. I've looked into ways, I've reached out to some experts nationwide, actually, that have given me some ideas and shown me some of the research that they've done. Some of the ideas that we've thrown back and forth is a multi-jurisdictional collaboration between Fall River and the surrounding towns. The surrounding towns, such as Swansea, Somerset, Freetown, don't have detox facilities or rehabilitation facilities for that matter, so their addicted come here for help, okay? There's no reason why the city of Fall River should be footing the bill for the surrounding towns. What I would like to see done is, instead of having multiple methadone clinics throughout the city, I've mentioned this recently, we have almost as many as the city of Boston. I believe we have as many as the city of Boston. I would like to see one facility that handles dual diagnosis, the recovery, the mental health. That way, when the people are there getting the help that they need, they're handling both issues. And when they hit the street, they're not going back to the first issue that caused the addiction.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
Thank you, Keith, and thank you for allowing us to have this forum. I think I have to answer this in twofold because I was on the city council for a number of years. We talk about contaminated land. Fall River had 7 acres of contaminated land. It came down that they wanted Republic, give the 7 acres to Republic. Republic will cover it. It won't cost the city a dime. But you're giving them 7 acres. When that came before the council, I objected to that, and I'm not one that objects often. Because of my objection, we were able to sit down with Republic and get 50% of what they made on profits. That brought in $1 million from somebody else's pocket, not from our taxpayers' pocket. I secured a $500,000 grant, again, without taxpayer funding, for Dave's Beach. That's why you have the floater ramp there. I created the Youth and Elder Affairs Committee on the City Council. That started the Durfee After Prom Party. I did the Commission on Disabilities. Right now, I want to work on doing more with our youth. Don't want to see people, young people, getting addicted to drugs, but we need to start taking care of our youth and having things for them to do. I also want to resurge Dave's Beach area because we're surrounded by water and we can't put a toe in it. It's not fair, and families need a place to go, a picnic area. I want to work on that, and I want to brighten the lights of the city. Something's going on with the lights in this city. They're too dim, and I'm going to find out why. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ponte.
Thank you. And one of the first things I learned when getting elected to the City Council 4 years ago was that in order to accomplish anything as a City Councilor, you need to be able to work with your colleagues. Many people who have been on the City Council for as many years recognize the fact that in order to get anything done, you need the support of your colleagues. And if you're not on the City Council and you're new to the City Council, you're going to find that out really, really fast. Some of the things that I'm proud that I was able to accomplish with my colleagues is to advocate for financial stability, advocate for strong economic development, advocate for strong public safety. I could sit here and go through a litany of things. Just about 3.5 years ago, when the prior administration wanted to sell our trash trucks for $500,000, it was the council at that time who advocated to go out and rebid for those trash trucks, and we got over $1 million for those trash trucks. We can talk about financial stability when I challenged the administration, took a strong stance on the fact that I wasn't satisfied with their revenue projections, so I held them accountable, and my colleagues and I worked to eliminate some items in their revenue numbers so that there was excess money available in their budget going forward. I could sit and talk about the capital items and the capital items that the city needs when it comes to police, fire, MIS, water, and public safety that are an important part of moving this community forward. So one of the biggest accomplishments that I say that we have had as a community, as a council, is being able to work together to get things done. And even if you disagree on something, we can all go to bed at night knowing that we put our best foot forward. So that's one thing I'm very proud to say.
Thank you. Our next question will be asked by Phil Devitt from the Herald News and will be answered first by Pam LaLiberty LeBeau.
The mayor is currently the only local official who signs off on letters of non-opposition and host community agreements for marijuana companies that are seeking to set up shop in Fall River. State Rep Carol Fiola has filed a bill that would require those companies to seek approval from a majority of locally elected officials in a community. In Fall River's case, that would be the council. Would you support this measure, and how much oversight do you think the council should have in the approval process?
Great question. One that's been in the news a lot lately, and I do support Rep. Viola's measure, but it's unfortunate that it had to get that far. A lot of cities and towns took it upon themselves, or mayors took it upon themselves, to not be that sole position. That didn't happen here in Fall River, and unfortunately we are suffering from the fallout from that. I'm not sure if it should just be the council involved, or if it should be a committee of different people on the subject, experts in the subject, planning. Everything needs to be involved. Right now we have in our council office all of the information that was given to us on how different companies were selected and how they were even given a letter. And we don't even have a process for that. So not so much just the committee, but the process from start to finish. Everybody should be asked the same things. Everybody should be in a public process. Everybody should be given the opportunity to ask for a letter. It shouldn't be, unfortunately, the way that it happened here. So whether it's just the council, I'm not sure about that. I think it needs to be a little bit broader of a committee, and of course, the mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
The premise of Carol Fiola's proposal, I agree with. I think that it gives you an opportunity to have more eyes on the situation, so that way there is some level of accountability. I never would approve of a single individual being the sole person that allows for this process to happen, because there's just way too many, even a perception of corruption, I'm not comfortable with, and I don't think the city would be comfortable with as well. So yeah, I would agree with most of her proposal on that, to get more eyes on it. I agree also with the idea of having some type of committee that's dedicated to oversight of the process as well.
Thank you. Mr. Peckham.
I'm going to echo some of that. I believe that the opposition letter should not be solely the responsible of one individual. I believe there should be a committee, maybe somebody from the zoning board, since I've heard quite a few complaints as to where some of these facilities wanted to be placed. That would fall under zoning, licensing, city council, as Ms. LeBeau stated, maybe an expert on the subject matter, and work in collaboration to cover all aspects of it before the letter's actually given out. That way there's no questions to be answered afterwards.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
I think the Cannabis Control Commission missed the mark on this. It's a new industry coming into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I don't think that they dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's. I think that the city dropped the ball. There should have been ordinances put in place as to where these facilities can be located, and everyone should have an opportunity to get a letter of non-opposition if they come forward. There were some people that told me they couldn't even get an appointment with the mayor. And if you are going to do and give someone a letter of non-opposition, they absolutely shouldn't have to pay for it. That's ridiculous. As far as limiting them, that's another issue that has been brought up on the council. I don't understand why you're not going to limit marijuana facilities, but you limit package stores and you limit liquor licenses. So when you have a new business coming in, like the Asian restaurant that opened up at Stafford Square, they waited over a year to get a beer and wine license. That's ridiculous. So why do they have to wait? If you want economic growth, then maybe we need to look at broadening parameters too for a business like that. But I think that they need to look at the ordinances, and I don't think a committee should be put together. I think your elected leaders, members of the city council, should be together to look at what works and what locations and which letters of non-opposition we would give. Thank you.
Mr. Ponte.
Thank you. So who's mastered this fantastic is New Bedford. Fall River has definitely dropped the ball when it comes to how they send their letters of non-opposition, and I guess we could all point fingers at each other on who's responsible. I think we learned a lesson that if we give one specific individual all the power to grant letters of non-opposition, we see where we're at today, where we're dealing with the issues that we face. How New Bedford does it is with structure, and it is done the right way. New Bedford has an ordinance that is filed within their city council, which I know Council Vice President and I, as well as other councilors, have had discussions about implementing this over the last couple of months, is that anybody who wants a letter of non-opposition in New Bedford needs to go before a board. It's forwarded then to the planning board. The planning board then refers it over to their city council, and it's adopted at that point. I had numerous conversations with the city council president in New Bedford, Linda Morad, who said it works. Nobody's investigating New Bedford about marijuana kickbacks or anything along those lines. I think Fall River should have the opportunity to have done this the right way before. We didn't. New Bedford did it the right way, and if we were in the position where we were looking backwards, we should have adopted the same verbiage and the same language as the city of New Bedford did with their ordinance, and have the proper transparency and the proper openness to make sure that what has alleged happened doesn't happen and shouldn't happen.
Mr. Camara.
Well, I do think that we need to take a look at the process. The state determined the process, and in Fall River, having the chief executive as the final, if you will, decision maker on providing letters of non-opposition, we have the system that we currently have. But I do think that in the interest of transparency and in the interest of opening up the process so that the public is aware of the applicants, that it should be handled, and I believe by the council. The way we handle basically auto body shops, auto repair shops, even curb removals, we seek whether there's any proponents or opponents. We get a police chief report on the applicant, so that would be appropriate too in this case. One of the things that a letter of non-opposition should include is the ability of a business owner to finance the project. So all of those things, I think, could be taken into account with some kind of a review board. Ultimately, it should emphasize that it is the Cannabis Control Commission that makes the decision, so they need to pursue all of these issues as well. But I think the local government should have a screening process that opens the door to applicants and then allows the state to take over in making the final decision.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Sure. Yeah, so I have, I guess, a slightly different view on this. I see it from the side of a banker, and I see that we have an industry that's been legalized, and it's growing. And ultimately, you know, we do want to have the appropriate controls. We do want to be able to avoid citing issues, and we want to, and I agree that we need to have a broader approval process essentially in place and make sure that it really does fit where it's going. However, with that said, I think we need to take the politics out of the process. I think that's where you ultimately had, you know, that caused some bad faith acting. And I think what we want is sort of like technocrats in there, you know, just making sure that the applicant complies with all of the requirements for the program. It should be a matter of checking boxes. It should be predictable from the standpoint of the investor. You know, and this, a lot of money goes into these businesses, and obviously it hasn't been predictable, right? Allegedly. So, you know, we need to make sure that we are making it more predictable. I'm okay with capping the number. We certainly have way more letters of non-opposition than we do facilities, and that will be the case for a long time.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
I just want to say first, I echo the sentiments of my colleagues. That being said, marijuana is a cash business only. And I think that's the first issue. It's open to corruption if there's certain individuals in there who don't have the city's best intentions at heart. I think I fully support Carol Fellow's bill. What we first need to do is work with our state and federal officials to make marijuana a more than just a cash business, and I think that's the first way we need to go. The second thing, non-opposition letters should not be handed out by just one individual. We need to work as a team in a collaborative effort. So I believe the city council should form a review board of with individuals of expertise to give us recommendations when it comes to these non-opposition letters. So if this bill passes, then the city council, along with the mayor, can work together and decide what non-opposition letters, what dispensaries are best for the city, and we can go on from there.
Thank you. Pam Martin from FRG-TV will ask our next question, and it will be first answered by Christopher Peckham.
Thanks, Keith. Many cities recognize that historic preservation is much more than just saving old places. It's also an excellent business incubator, a job generator, and an economic engine. Members of the Preservation Society of Fall River point to our sister city in New Bedford as an example of a success story. Do you have a vision for historic Fall River? And what have you done so far to promote historic preservation here?
I happen to be a history guy. I have passion for history and city history in particular. I often like to tell the story of how Fall Riverites got their accent, dating back to the textile days. I took notice to Lizzie Borden's elementary school that's unfortunately going to be taken down, and I put a post on Facebook about it and how the deal was originally set and how it seems that it didn't come to fruition the way that it was planned. I did voice my opinion. I would have liked to have seen that building rehabbed. It's a historical site within the city. I think we could have done more with it, being the purpose that it had served 100 years ago, and Lizzie Borden's house being right down the street. I think they could have went hand in hand with each other, and we talk about tourism a lot within the city. The historical value of Fall River could be, it could set a precedent to save these buildings and advance tourism. Again, that building's literally a stone's throw from Lizzie Borden's house. We could have somehow worked something out to save that building. It's actually heartbreaking to see that it's going to come down.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
Well, I will tell you my feelings on the history of Fall River. When I look at the fact that we have Olmsted parks within the city, and we have cemeteries within the city that are also, Olmsted developments. When I look at the Oak Grove Cemetery being demolished 2 years ago, was it? 3 years already? Where all of the flower pots and vases that were purchased at the time of that person's death were purchased with the gravestone. And then people came and tore down the urns on the side, the flower boxes in the front, bronze statues that were placed from a person's war service were taken away. Honestly, I think that a person should have been fired because they destroyed the history of that cemetery. To date, they have still not replaced that. And if I'm lucky enough to get elected again, that's another thing that I would work on. And I think you have to have the Preservation Society and Historical Society working together and give them the value that they have. They're not given the value. We just opened up, or they just are doing a groundbreaking in a methadone clinic down in the North End. They didn't even contact the Historical Society. You need 6 months' notice to knock down the chimney that's there. Nobody cares. So you can't say you care about historical preservation and then not. So I think that that's a very good question, Pam, because our history is important to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ponte.
So we don't talk enough about the value of historic preservation in Fall River, but what we do talk a lot about is the buildings in Fall River that have historic components to it that everybody wants to knock down, like our former police station that has been a political turmoil fight for about 15, 20 years. We don't talk about the utilization of our downtown in Fall River, which I strongly believe and will be advocating over the next 2 years to take from Columbia Square on the top of Columbia Street, working all the way down to Sullivan Drive near Government Center, make that a one-way, improve our the width of our sidewalks to allow for downtown revitalization, leverage the CDA money that we have in the city of Fall River for the facade program that has been used but needs to be, we need to do a better job of that. But one of the things I got to say I'm happy that we've been able to accomplish as a community is the TIFs that we've been able to give to some of the larger facilities like Commonwealth Landing, for instance, which has turned into an economic engine with the restaurants that are there, with additional businesses go in there, with market rate housing. We've done a great job in Fall River converting a lot of the old mills, specifically the one on Alden Street, to market rate housing. Some of them have also been to senior citizens, to 55-plus communities that have been restored. So we've done a good job in Fall River promoting historic preservation. I haven't been an advocate for taking some of the buildings like CD Rec or the police station and let's knock it down and make it a parking lot. If that's the option, fine, but we've done a good job in Fall River over the last couple of years, specifically the last 4 to 10 years, of holding on to historic preservation for sure.
Thank you. Mr. Camara.
Pam, thanks for that question. I am passionate about historic preservation. As a young college student, I returned to Fall River when the Durfee Theater was scheduled for demolition, and with the good help of the Holy Union nuns up at Sacred Hearts Academy, we created petitions and distributed them throughout the community to try to stop the demolition of that Durfee Theater. We also sponsored a preservation meeting and expanded the definition of preservation to include not only historic structures and the historic theaters, there was both the Durfee and the Academy at that time, but also our parks, playgrounds, historic monuments, and our green space, protecting all of that. We have 3 Olmsted parks, we have Olmsted designed greens, and again, as someone who did my graduate work in New York City, I understand and see economic development as the benefit of historic preservation. When I was finally able, again, in the late 70s to buy a house, I bought an historic property on Purchase Street, in fact, and was fortunate enough to buy other properties, and I've put meticulous effort in properly preserving these properties in this historic neighborhood. So absolutely, preservation is good economic development practice.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Yeah, so I agree with Steve. I think we need to celebrate our historic preservation efforts and really find ways to broaden them going forward. So we all know that New Bedford is a bit of a success story. They have a different urban fabric than Fall River does. We're more linear and they're sort of more woven. But we have seen the impact that preserving historic preservation has had for New Bedford. I'd like to see some new ideas. We know that having these properties, it brings character, it brings value. We've talked about the parks. How about St. Anne's? We haven't talked about St. Anne's and the potential, loss of that, which is just mind-boggling. We can't let that happen. So we really do have to put attention into historic preservation right now. I would like to see, with the development of the waterfront, tie that right up into the historic Highlands with app-based touring. It'll walk you through, right now you're in front of this house and here's the story, and really encourage people to find adventures in Fall River. And part of the way that you're going to find adventures in Fall River is through our history. It is pretty exciting. We do have axe murderers. It's already a draw, and we really need to strengthen it. And there are new and interesting ways to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
No, speaking of the waterfront, we have Battleship Cove, which is like the largest collection of historic battleships around. I believe we need to work more with our economic development director and various business individuals to promote that more, because that is probably the biggest big part of history of Fall River that's not promoted enough, which should be promoted a lot more. And I believe it's underused, underutilized, which is a shame. And speaking of preservation, I actually want to talk about also environmental preservation. I believe there's a lot of deforestation, too much deforestation happening within Fall River, especially in the north end with all the new housing coming in and whatnot. We need to make sure that also animals who are now going out in the middle of Highland Avenue are being taken care of. We need to make sure that not just all our individuals, but all our species and our wildlife are taken care of as well.
Thank you. Ms. Liberty LeBeau.
Thank you. So, as many people know, I didn't grow up in Fall River, but I grew up in a little town called Sandwich, Massachusetts, which is all about historic preservation. As a child, it wasn't very fun or interesting to live there, but as an adult, I have a huge appreciation for preserving our historic buildings. As far as our city buildings go, I just put in a resolution, last night's meeting, with the urging and the input from the Historic and Preservation Societies to have our own ordinances looked at before any of our own city-owned buildings are demolished, whether it's for sale and there's a reverter clause in there, or what we can do or how we go about choosing who's going to buy these buildings. And as far as the city itself goes, there's so many things going on in the city that people don't even know about. We have tour buses that are going to the Lizzie Borden House. We have tour buses going to our historic museum. If you happen to see that there's a tour of the Ice House or the Spencer Borden Mansion, it fills up very quickly. Our cemeteries, as Councilor Pereira was saying, is very unfortunate what happened in Oak Grove Cemetery. I feel that a lot of times our own laws are ignored, so hopefully or our historic laws are ignored, by strengthening our ordinances, we'll be able to stop that from happening.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Well, I support any efforts to promote our history, our rich history. Just recently, about maybe a few months ago, there was an acquisition of a home that was part of the Underground Railroad, for example. To me, I find a lot of that interesting. I find that other people who ask me about this area, they don't necessarily always say Fall River, but they ask about this area, the colonial times. My time in the military, I tell people I was from Fall River, they don't know what that is. They know Emerald Degassi, or they might know a Chris Herron story or something like that, but they do know Fall River to some degree, and it's based a lot on a lot of historical factors. However, it comes down to funding. It comes down to the fact that this is a struggling city when it comes to just funding fixing roads and fixing, schools and things like that. So when we talk about the historical process and preserving historical property, we need investors out there that want to put the time and effort into that. So as a city council, we have to go out there, we have to reach out to people who want to invest in the history of Fall River and preserving it. It all comes down to resources. You name the topic that we talk about, it's always going to come down to who wants to invest in Fall River. And again, I go back to the environment. If we take care of our city, it's a city that people will want to invest in.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Alan Zarek from WSAR, and it will be answered first by Tim Cole.
With the Correa administration coming to an end in a matter of weeks, are there policies or initiatives from that administration that should continue into the next administration and a new city council?
Good question. It's an interesting dichotomy that we have in this case. We hear on the one hand that we've had a national corruption scandal, but on the other hand, we have a lot of people saying that, well, but the work was good. And, I think there will be, I'm sure some of the work was good, because it wasn't just done by Jazel, it was done by the employees of City Hall and, Fall River. And, they're gonna still be there. So I believe that you don't just give up on your plans because you've changed leadership. I mean, you might reevaluate, but you're not going to give up. And you need to make sure that you're building upon the accomplishments that you've had in the past. Now, there's been a lot of talk about streetscapes versus a broader transportation investment program. And, I think that probably is wise. I mean, we all know that there are whole areas of the city that, it's tough to find a street to drive on that isn't going to potentially damage your vehicle. But, the Streetscapes program showed that if you concentrate money into a certain area, it can make a dramatic impact. But I think right now what you're hearing from the voters of the city is we'd rather see that investment spread across the entire city so that everybody can benefit from it.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
I believe the Jason Correa administration did well when it came to like police, fire, and some financial practices were great for the city. There's a lot of things I disagreed with this administration, and when it comes to streetscapes, I personally believe it is time that we end Jason Correa's streetscapes and allocate the funding to a general street and sidewalk repair. And when we talk about moving on, there's one issue I want to bring up with that. I think it's time for a transition. Like, for example, we still have the mayor's face on the city website. I believe it's time to remove him so there's no more shame and embarrassment for our community. But that being said, we should continue some of the good practices going on and eliminate the bad, which there were equally both, I would say.
Thank you. Ms. Liberty LeBeau.
Thank you. So what I would like to see ended in, and I believe it will be ended, and I feel it already walking around Government Center and talking with our city employees, which we are fortunate that we have very good, very hardworking city employees, is any type of ruling by threats and intimidation. That it's already a different feel, just for myself walking around Government Center, even today. It was comfortable being there, and we haven't had that in a while. As far as initiatives, again, on last night's meeting, we had the streetscapes. I have a resolution in to rescind the funding for the streetscapes that have not gone out to bond yet, because unfortunately what we've seen is the ones that have been completed are either over budget and being litigated, or they are not a great product. And we're having issue with, a vendor that needs to be paid versus the quality of the work that was done. So when you have two projects that are done, without great success, it's hard to keep going and hope that, the next one will be better. I think everyone needs to take a giant step backwards. We're going into winter anyway. Really see what kind of state funding we can get, and if we can get it, and take our time. If we are going to continue, we need to do the projects right. We want to look at the streetscapes and notice that something's been done and have a wow factor instead of litigation.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Streetscapes is obviously one of the more unpopular policies that Jason Correa implemented. I never supported it from the get-go because of how it was funded. I didn't think that we had a real repair plan in place when we were putting this out there. And bonding, not really a big fan of bonding for something that can get damaged so quickly as a sidewalk or a road. So I was not happy with how that whole process went down. And that's coming from someone who has supported some policies. And one of the policies that I was looking forward to seeing before the controversy came was investment in solar and wind energy, which I'm hoping whoever is the new mayor coming down the line, that they are looking at alternative forms of energy in the future. And also just in general, looking at outside sources of income for the city outside of the tax base. It's something that will help us long term if we're able to find revenue outside of the tax base.
Thank you. Mr. Peckham.
One thing that I took from the Carrera administration as a positive would be public safety, which I happen to work in and have for many years now, with a great appreciation to Mr. Dion for obtaining the fire trucks for the Fall River Fire Department. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, okay? I've heard a lot of false narratives over the past few months that the police department's double in size. Negative, not true. To my last, from what I was told last, we have 168 patrolmen, and the rest are administrative staff, okay? We run 10 cars 5 days a week in the city of Fall River, which is completely ridiculous. Some of our police officers, which I'm being told now the radios are coming in, our police officers and firefighters have had radios that haven't worked in the north end of Fall River. I left it 11 years ago. They didn't work then, and they didn't work during the Fall Winds fire this past January. That's an issue. That's something that needs to be addressed. I hope the incoming administration looks at that and addresses it, okay, or continues to address it. The other thing being, I'm being told that we're buying a ton of new cars for the police department. Well, as of 2 months ago, car 6 was offline. They were using car 22, car 5 was using car 15. We run no sector 11 or sector 6, which are 2 of the busier sectors of the city. Outside of the fire department getting new trucks and the firefighters living in buildings that are inhabitable.
Thank you.
We need more help with
Thank
public
you.
safety.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
Thank you. Alan, the question was, what initiatives from this administration, from the career administration, would we move forward? That was the question, right? The only thing that I would move forward would be public safety, the amount of money that Mr. Dion's office actually came up with the money, Mr. Peckham's right, for the fire trucks. And I think that we need to continue to do that through the police department, because I think we fell short on the police department. They need new vehicles. I had talked about Shot Spotter. The mayor had gotten rid of that, but then all of a sudden, we got it back. The police need as many tools as they can get to combat the crime that we have in the city. I'm a big advocate for a 2-man police car, because when you get to a scene of a crime, I don't care if it's a domestic in a house, you wait until you get back up before you enter that home. That's crazy. There should be 2-man police cars in Fall River. I would push for that. Anything else that they've done, I never voted for streetscapes. I knew it was going to be an abysmal failure, and it turned out to be. So I never voted for that. But everything else that was done, that's it. Stop. This should be a new beginning for an administration to be honest, full of integrity, transparent to the people, and spend the taxpayers' money wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ponte.
Thank you. So what I think the career administration did well was leveraging our bond dollars. I know that there were some comments made recently and just a little while ago about not wanting to bond. Well, let me tell you that if you don't bond, we don't have a Durfee High School that is being built on Ellsbury Street. If we don't bond, we aren't doing infrastructure repairs, because the Chapter 90 money that the city of Fall River receives for road repair is $2 million a year. If we don't bond, we're pretty much not repairing all of our schools that we have brand new windows going in some of the schools like Tansy. So what the career administration has done well is they've kept us under our $10 million debt for bonding. They've leveraged that. Unfortunately, we did have to go to a debt exclusion to build the new Durfee High School, but it was leveraging our bond dollars, which is what they did. And I have to echo a lot of the comments that were made here today. The career administration did a good job leveraging their CDA dollars for our fire trucks, which did need dire repair of need. But it is our priority. It needs to be our joint priority going forward. That if we want to preserve these fire trucks that we all happen to speak so highly of, we need money in our budget, and we need to advocate as city councilors to make sure money is in our budget to preserve those fire engines and those fire trucks, as we have a very challenging city, as we are a city of hills, and if you speak to our police chief, it is a challenge for him.
Thank you. Mr. Camara.
Well, there's much to be looked at that's happened with this council and this mayor over the past several years. A few of those items, when the previous mayor, prior to Mayor Correa, was in office, he declared that Fall River was close to being in receivership. And we went from being close to being in receivership to now having almost a $10 million surplus rainy day fund. So I hope that any future administration will continue to grow that fund so that Fall River can be prepared for any difficulties, whether they be 9C cuts or some other kind of financial situation that requires a resource to have. This administration was responsible for the elimination of very unpopular fees, both the trash fee and the purple bag fee. Property owners and rent payers need relief, and there was some relief provided because of those 2 eliminations. There also have been significant improvements in our parks. I know that as a long-term counselor, I would always go to mayors and say, we've got to repair the sidewalks in our parks. We've got to make our parks more enjoyable for kids. During this period of time, this council and this mayor have put great investments in our parks to make them better places for children and for families. And there are many other things that have happened that have been good.
Thank you. Donna Mata has our next question from FRC Media. and it will be answered first by Trot Lee.
With all this talk about historic preservation and what the CREA administration has done correctly, is it time to promote the city in terms of tourism? And if so, is the way to do it through a tourism director? Because a director wouldn't have a whole lot of resources to work with. So is it time, first of all, to promote Fall River and tourism? And how would you propose to do that?
So a director this is not a new topic. We've talked about a tourism director pretty much every single forum that I've been in. I don't support a director position at the moment right now. I think that, well, first of all, we need to know what the mayor's position is on it when that comes down the line anyway. But from my perspective, I think that we do have a subcommittee for tourism. It needs to be more active, in my opinion. I think the groundwork should start there from a city council perspective, and then see what comes down the line from the executive side, and go from there. But we don't have. I still don't believe that we have resources in place just to dedicate this one position when we don't have an actual tourism plan in place. And most of the things that we have right now, we need more funding to make attractive for tourism. The waterfront is talked about a lot. The Quequechan River, I mean, there was a lot of work done to shut that down. I think if we ever had the funding to open that up and make that a part of our economic tourism process, I think that would be great. But we have a lot of things that we need to clear up financially before we just start giving somebody that kind of money. I just don't see that resulting in something positive.
Thank you. Mr. Peckham.
As far as tourism, I toyed with the idea back and forth on how to go about that. I would like to see, if we are going to have a tourism director, that it would fall in line with economic development and maybe make it a one-person dual job. It saves a salary, okay? With that being said, I would like to see, the waterfront is mentioned quite often. Another place where people from outside the city come is the rail trail, and I've brought light to that recently, and the debacle that's turned into. If you want to look at my Facebook page and see the pictures, it needs some help. It's a beautiful, beautiful section of the city that if we don't start the cleanup soon, it's going to go by the wayside, and we're going to end up losing it. As far as the waterfront, I see that, I would like to see the art district built up more and try to bring in more businesses that pertain to the arts. To build on the waterfront itself, you got the State Pier there, the Battleship Cove, we have Point Gloria. A lot of that's state-owned, and the State Pier itself is actually federally governed. You can't work there without a TWIC card. So it's tough to put actual businesses on the waterfront itself now because there's very little land, but to bring businesses into that area, we have the Narrows. That would be phenomenal to build our arts district. And New Bedford kind of did something similar with their downtown. They made it an artsy destination, and they do well.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
I could look at a couple of things. As far as the tourism director, I think a tourism director would be advantageous to the city. When Bob Carrere was mayor, he had the trolley cars that went around. I think that you could get any auto body shop in the city to redo our trolley cars and go around the city. Put the name of the company that redid them, but you would go and see the Highlands, you would see the older homes, you would see the row houses on Broadway. There's so many things. Watuppa Pond, biggest bass fishing pond. You know how many tournaments you could have there? People pay big bucks to come in and participate in that. You have the Brighton Street Bridge. Let's get that thing painted. Let's get that thing open. There's parking on the side that's available. Put some vendors there. Let's look at the gates of the city. If it's the gates of the city, why don't we fence that in? You could have shows. You have Foxwood and Mohegan and all those places. People come, they perform there. You might get them cheap to come and perform here one night. Have some activities there. There are things to do, but you can't do it alone. It needs to be a combined effort. And I think that Sandy Dennis has done a tremendous job in all that she has done to try to bring things into Fall River. I think somebody like her is just perfect for the job if she would want it. And it's not major money, but look at the investment that you're going to get back. And use these food vendors, these trucks, they're going all over the place. Come on, get people motivated, get people excited about being here. Thank you, Keith.
Mr. Ponte.
So I don't want to lose track of the fact that we do have a director, some sort of economic development that does report to the redevelopment authority at no cost to the taxpayers in the sense of a salary. That is currently happening. That is currently in full force, limited in what their scope can do because it's based on the redevelopment authority properties, what they can and can't do with it. But let's not lose track of the fact that there is a main point of contact for economic development. And what I think we need to start getting away from is there doesn't need to be one main person who does economic development. Let's speak about the strength of other departments. Let's not no longer be a conversation about the city of Fall River versus Ken Fiola in the Office of Economic Development. Let's shy away from that and let's bring every group in to have an economic development force that is like no other community. Let's bring CAN in, let's bring FROED in, let's bring a number of different economic engines that will just move Fall River forward as being one of the strongest economic foundations in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We've done a good job of doing and offering small business loans and enterprising for job creation and job retention over the last 5 or 10 years. And I think what we need to continue to do is have a point of contact to link the businesses and the local career centers for hiring Fall River residents, which my colleague to my right here, Linda Pereira, has always advocated for as well.
Thank you. Mr. Camara.
Fall River has all of the ingredients to become New England's next great city, from our waterfront to our neighborhoods to our historic districts. So having a director, but I don't think it should be exclusively a director of tourism. It should be a director of tourism, arts, and culture, because arts and culture are truly the driving force, the economic force in so many communities in enhancing their economic development. We need only look at Providence and New Bedford as 2 examples that have used the arts to promote their tourism and to promote the beauty of their particular communities. I was formerly a director under the Chamber of Commerce of the, some may remember, the tourism center that we had on I-195. So I got to meet a lot of people that were traveling to Cape Cod or to Newport coming over the Massachusetts line. And when they heard of what existed in Fall River from me and the team that worked in that particular trailer, it was kind of a nasty place, but we did the best we could with the resources we had. We were able to channel a lot of people into Fall River, and they were impressed with what we had. So let's not underestimate our greatness. We have the potential to be New England's next great city. Let's make it happen.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a great question. I think that ultimately it's an example of how you can invest in the community, how investment can drive more revenue and growth in the future. And tourism is something, like Steve says, that's kind of ripe for picking in Fall River. But I would say this to the director position. I think we've got the wrong geography. I think we need a director of tourism for the South Coast. And I think that ultimately the South Coast is where you might be able to get people to come and stay for a week. You know, spend your day in Fall River, spend your day, you know, in New Bedford, spend your day in Newport, maybe Providence, right? But, you know, we do have all of the ingredients in place to take advantage of, and we just have to get the temperature right, you know, to bake the right product. And I think that leads, what you do, you know, this is all about regionalism. You know, I got my master's degree in city and regional planning, and I worked with economic development directors in the past. Starting with a strong tourism function for the region is the most important thing. Fundamentally, I think what you want to see out of Fall River is campaigns. You want to see successful campaigns. I don't care who puts them together, as long as you have successful campaigns for, you know, individual excursions that draw people into the city once they've been brought to the South Coast.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
To directly answer your question, Donna, if the mayor sent down a proposal to fund a tourism director, I would support that. I believe Fall River has many great, we already have the tools here already. We have great small and large businesses already that can be promoted. I believe economic development and tourism are two different things. You have the economic development, and the tourism is basically the advertisement for that economic development. We have great businesses in the community, but there are still things we have to work on in order to have a very successful tourism campaign. We need to improve our roadways. And I've spoke to that before. We need to make sure we don't have any potholes, that individuals aren't filing claim against the city, and we need to improve our parks. I disagree with Councilor Camara that all our parks are in great condition. For example, if you want to go down to Kennedy Park, you can see all the mangled stairways there. We need to improve our parks, and we need to improve our housing. I've received so many complaints around the community of nuisance properties, absentee properties, slumlord properties, drug trafficking in apartments, and we need to start off by strengthening and enforcing our property laws. I believe if we have that all together, we'll have a successful tourism campaign.
Thank you. Ms. Liberty LeBeau.
Thank you. I am the current chair on the Committee on Tourism and Economic Development, and the administration did send down two proposals, actually. They were giving the council options on what we would like to see. And what we asked them to do was to tell us what the administration wanted. The administration proposes and the council approves or disposes. And we also asked that the position not be a political hire, a gift of a job for somebody. And they did not bring it back down. I actually had a conversation with the city administrator just earlier today asking why it hasn't come back down, and she said that she could not promise the hiring of that position. So it is currently tabled in committee, but I do agree with it. I just made a quick list while the others were talking of a Historic Society, Battleship Cove, the Gates of the City, which is getting hopefully new electricity to have even bigger events. We have the boardwalk, the Narrows, Route 79 is coming down. As Ms. Pereira was saying about the trolleys, the Creative Arts Network with the Dennises have worked to get, they already have funding for new trolleys, fully handicapped accessible trolleys, with help from the Disability Commission. I'm working with the state delegation on a hat shell. All of these different things have events. There are events happening everywhere, but we don't have anybody putting it all together and really promoting it. And I think we saw that with the Fabric Arts Festival. It was a great festival, and we should have had thousands of people in the city for that. But what we don't have is the promotion, and we need it.
Thank you. I think we're going to have time for one more round of questioning. Then we'll do our closing statement. So we'll go back to Michael Sylvia from the Fall River Reporter, who will ask a question first to Linda Pereira.
Year after year, Fall River falls on the list of most dangerous cities in Massachusetts. Youth unemployment is a major contributor to the crime in the city. As minimum wage continues to rise to $15 by 2023, our youth continue to be pushed out of the job market. Share some ideas that will reduce youth unemployment, thus reduce crime in the city of Fall River.
I don't think that it's just youth unemployment that creates that. I have a granddaughter who's 16, and we have been all over for her to apply for a job, because obviously 16, she wants to get a car, et cetera. But I don't think it's just the unemployment. I think it's the lack of what youth can do. And sometimes you need to start out with volunteering so that you have something to put on a paper, something to put on a resume. You've got to get the youth involved, and that's one of the big things that I feel needs to happen. You need to have things like at Kennedy Park. You need to have talks. People will come down and give a talk on different issues. Think about having a Fall Rivers Got Talent. Think of how much youth is going to come out. I think we look at the youth of our city and we don't look at the positive youth that we have. The youth that are working, that are doing good, that are involved in extracurricular activities at schools. Why don't we have street theater again? Why don't we do that? If we want to promote culture and the arts and we want to get our youth involved, that's where you start. So I don't think it's so much about unemployment of youth. I think it's about just getting youth to feel that they're wanted, they're loved, they're part of this community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ponte.
I think we need to do a better job as a community leveraging the programs that we have. We have, we have BCTC, who I recently, just last night, actually appointed Beth Viveris, as I'm acting mayor, to the role of interim director of BCTC, somebody who's been there for 39 years, who has done a tremendous amount of work with our youth. Let's talk about somebody like Christian McClowski, who does a tremendous amount of work with our youth. Last night, the City Council, I worked with my colleagues on the City Council, gave Peter McCarthy from the Boys and Girls Club a citation of over 25 years of service to the greater Fall River community. But one thing that I think would make a big difference is start talking on all of our high schools, Atlantis Charter School, Diamond, Durfee, Conley, is have the school to career program that, and start speaking about it more. Work, you leave school at 11 o'clock, you start your career, go to work, and report back to school. Durfee High School did that under Tom Pavo for many, many years, and it was a booming success at Durfee High School. As you were an upperclassman, your junior and senior year, if you were done your credits and you were qualified enough, you were able to go away to your job. At that time, I was at Fall River Municipal Credit Union, and I left Durfee at noontime, and I worked until 4, and I reported back to, my supervisor at Durfee in terms of how that helped me. And I got to say that if we leverage that more, speak more about it, and promote it more within our schools and all of our high schools, it'll make a big difference going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Camara.
Well, I reject the premise that Fall River is a dangerous city. I think Fall River is a safe city overall. There are problems, as exist in every urban community, but I feel comfortable, and I think most people feel comfortable in their neighborhoods and in their city. The youth unemployment rate is unquestionably an important one, and that's why I don't just involve myself in local activities. I involve myself in both national policy and state policy. Youth unemployment is significantly higher, and minority youth unemployment is even higher than just the general youth unemployment. But we need a national policy, and we need state policies that address the issue of youth unemployment. So I encourage all of you who are watching and listening to involve yourselves in this upcoming presidential election to make sure that we have presidential, national leadership that address the issues of unemployment and opportunities for youth. We too many times like to think that we live in the vacuum of Fall River. We live very well connected to the entire planet and particularly to our country. And unless there's a national policy that addresses the question of the needs of youth and particularly minority youth, and Fall River is largely becoming a community of minority population, we will continue to fail to address the needs of youth in our community.
Thank you. Mr. Cole?
Yeah, so I guess I would also reject the premise, but a different premise. I do believe that Fall River has its dangers. It plays itself out in the statistics, and we can't deny it. We have to address it. We can't run away from these problems. I don't think that youth unemployment is the reason. I think that drug use is the reason. I think that, gang activity is the reason. I've been around to the neighborhood associations, and, you get the rundown of the crimes in the community over the last month, and yeah, there were a couple fights at Durfee, but for the most part, it had nothing to do with the kids. At the same time, I would like to sort of echo what Linda had to say, that let's look at it as something not about unemployment, but maybe uninvolvement. What we really want to do is raise the rate of involvement for kids, not necessarily stick them all into jobs. And Linda was pointing out, some paths forward to do that. I really have a vision. It's a long-term vision, and I wish I had more time to talk about it. But where Fall River is a classroom for the students in our community, and the learning takes place in the community. And by doing that, you're not only teaching them, how things get done, but why, by who. And they're building the social capital with the people in the community, knowing who actually does it and who they should call if they need that issue to be solved.
Thank you. Mr. Dias.
I would say to get to capitalize on youth involvement in the city. First, I would say I believe teachers need to be. There's a lot of kids at home who don't have their parents always there for them. Either they have multiple jobs or they're away, and I've obviously I'm 19 years old. I have I understand the situation they're going through. With that being said, I believe teachers, we need to train our teachers to be more role models. I believe people my age, friends my age, always, who are doing well, always talk about, they always have a great role model teacher in their life, and that's really, and they really set the cornerstone for them to have a successful future, whatever they want to do. So I believe we need to teach, we need to educate our teachers to be more role models and to have more one-on-one involvement with kids in the community. And I think especially the youth crime rate will start to drop, I believe.
Thank you. Ms. Liberty LeBeau.
Thank you. I also am not in agreement with the most dangerous city piece. We live in an urban environment. We live in a city. We're going to have traffic. We're going to have noise. We're going to have people that don't get along. We have a lot of people in small confined spaces, 3 families, 4 families, 6 families. And when they're comparing the towns for these, they're not always comparing the same statistics. Sometimes the towns don't even submit their statistics. So it's not the greatest comparison when you see those rankings. And I just had this conversation with my daughter the other night explaining that not everybody weighs in or gives the same statistics. And as far as youth unemployment, I apologize, I cannot remember which of the gentlemen to my right said it, but it is about getting the youth involved in early and having parent involvement and support at home. We don't want kids to slip through the cracks. We do have the Boys and Girls Club, we have CD Recreation, we have after-school programs at the schools, there's theater, sports, dance, there's anything that a child might want to get involved with. At the Boys and Girls Club, they have absolutely everything under the sun imaginable, and it is such a safe space. That was where my son was earlier this evening while I was here. He's in 4th grade. He absolutely loves it. But I think it starts at home. We need to get our parents involved. We need to get our kids involved in whatever they're interested in, and then we need to support them in that.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
I'll be the only one up here to say that there are dangerous parts of Fall River, that we do have to have concern for gang violence in Fall River and many other crime problems in Fall River. And your question connects poverty to violence, and I feel as though there are job opportunities that need to expand for children as well, or not children, but the youth in Fall River as well, but also it starts in the classroom. I just recently had a conversation with a school committee member who told me that they're making efforts to have more civic education in the classroom. And I think that's going to hopefully point children towards the direction of economics, of learning what taxes are, of learning, what bills really are, being responsible, and those kind of elements I think have not been ingrained as much as they can be in the youth of our city, and obviously in other communities as well. It would be of benefit to have, we've seen it in a national scale, that tax incentives to businesses can promote job growth. So maybe as what we can do as a city is provide incentives to businesses that will hire the youth, that'll hire and put them on the payroll so that they can have some funds as well.
Thank you. Mr. Peckham.
All right, without sugarcoating it, I'm going to go on a limb and say that Fall River is up there as one of the more dangerous cities in Massachusetts, okay? I do it for a living. If anybody wants to contest that, you can walk around the prison with me. The majority of those people are, it's an opiate addiction or a drug addiction. There's a relation there, correlation, okay? How I feel we could combat that? Actually, let me reverse. We have 3 motorcycle gangs now in the city and 2 gangs, one being the Asian Boys and the other one being a gang that runs between Fall River and New Bedford, okay? That handles a lot of the drug trade in the city. That's a major issue, and that's why our police department needs to be revamped, and we need to add people to it. That's how we're going to combat that issue. Early intervention in schools, to talk about addiction with the children, to talk about gang violence, okay? We used to have a really good gang program at Durfee High School when I was there. I graduated back in '01. I don't know if it still exists. I would like to look into that. That's where we need to start, is with the children, and teach them where gang violence leads you, where opiate addiction in general leads you, And I would also like to see something like the CETA program or CD Rec, which is still in existence, maybe expanded where we can get kids working early so they learn the benefit of having a job.
Thank you. Now it's time for our closing statements for tonight, 90 seconds apiece. And the candidate which will begin our closing statements will be Colin Dias.
I just want to first thank you, Keith. I also wish to thank the Fall River Reporter, Fall River Herald News, FRC Media, WSAR, and FRC Media again. I am running because I want to help restore honest government to our community and, most importantly, restore stable government to our community. I want to take on the systematic network of under-the-table deals and decisions being made for the privileged few and not everyone. I want everyone to have a seat at the table. Because if we have a cornerstone of honest government, we can tackle all the issues that face our community. So we can pass ethics reform. We can take on the Comcast contract that plagues the city with high fees. We can create park watch groups so we can monitor the drug activity that goes on in the parks, which we all know about. I am basically running, I'm an open, honest individual who will answer any question anyone ever has, and I just want to be the first part in the right direction, and I believe it's time this generation passes the torch on to the next generation, and we can move forward as a community for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Olivia LeBeau.
Thank you. Thank you to Fall River Community Media, FRC Media, and all the news organizations that are here tonight. I am very thankful for the support I have received over the past 2 terms as a city councilor. Thankful for my colleagues that voted for me to represent them as their city council vice president. This isn't an easy job. Some votes are not easy to take. Sometimes as a candidate or just a resident, when you're asked a question, it's easy to dance around what your answer might or might be, what vote you might or might not have taken. But when it's in front of you and you're sitting there, you have to take a vote. At the end of the day, you have to take a stance, and you have to take a vote, no matter what the outcry might be. You have to be strong enough, thick-skinned enough to take votes that aren't always popular. As a female city councilor, I have been criticized about my weight, my hair, my clothes, my family members, my children. And people ask me, why do you even bother? Because at the end of the day, you can make a difference. And the good absolutely outweighs the negative. You're able to help people. You're able to fix something that might seem very small, but to them, it makes all the difference in the world and how they feel about living here and how they're happy, and it's changed their day. So I appreciate the support over the last 2 terms, and I hope that it continues on in November. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Thank you to everyone for this opportunity. I always appreciate all of you coming here, and at the same time, I wish there was more. I wish that we had more of these kind of opportunities when candidates are coming out here. My name's Trot Lee, and I'm running for city council. I am a born and raised citizen of Fall River, and if you look at my history, any part of my history, you'll see that it's nothing but service to the community. Even as a little child, even as a kid, just volunteering in my church, and then being a military member later on after I graduated high school, getting involved in the community, putting time at the Veterans Center. Just no matter where you go in my history, I'm always looking out for the community. I'm always trying to do my best. And if you vote for me as a city councilor, all you're going to get is my best. You're going to get that same effort every single time, regardless of what's going on around me, whatever's going on around me, all the distractions that can come from being an elected official. I'm not going to let that bother me. I'm not going to let any of that bother me in service to the city. I've even talked to my job. I have a job that I love to death. It's part of the reason why I've never run for any bigger office than city council. And they've talked to me about also giving me the time to put into the city. So put that in your thoughts on November 5th and give me the opportunity to serve you as a city councilor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peckham.
I want to also thank everybody for their time tonight. Chris Peckham, again, born and raised in the city. Grew up in Watuppa Heights, moved to the Flint. I just want what's best for the city. I love this city more. It's right at the top with my family and my kids. This city means everything to me, okay? It's kind of a joke within the prison system when I'm walking around and the inmates will throw out Fall River and they'll wait to see if I turn my head. I don't hide where I come from, never have, okay? I've said it before, I've got it tattooed on my body. This is where I grew up. What I've taken away from tonight, more importantly, was listening to the other, the incumbents and the candidates on the side of me. What I want to bring to the table is, I have a strong background, public safety, addiction, okay? And after listening to the other people at the table, they also have things to offer too. All I wanted to do was bring what I was good at, right? And offer it to the city of Fall River. I was sitting through city council meetings, I was seeing bickering and all the negativity that was going on in the city, and I kept thinking to myself, how could I help? How could I best serve the city of Fall River? My whole life I've thought of myself as a public servant, and I was for public service and not self-service. I've always tried to be able to do things to help with my line of work between the Sheriff's Office, the Fall River PD, and the Department of Correction now. I've always tried to put myself in a position where I could help people. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pereira.
Well, I do stand up and speak out when I see things are wrong. One of those examples that I think is that we have no diversity on our boards and commission. If we're a diverse community, we should show it. But I also rally around and support things that are right, like the Vietnam Wall that we'll be getting here in Fall River. I think that's phenomenal. Fall River right now is going through a sad time. You look at citizens who feel distrustful towards elected leaders. But I think this is an opportunity to turn that around, reclaim and rebuild Fall River. You know I'm passionate and love our hometown. You know me. I've always tell it like it is, because that's who I am. So I would respectfully ask for your vote on Tuesday, November 5th. Along with thanking Keith and the panel, I'd like to thank all of the individuals here at this table, especially the newcomers who've never been through this process. It takes a lot to put your name on a ballot. Whether you win or you lose, you stood up to fight to try to make Fall River a better place. And for that, I applaud you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ponte.
Thank you. Tonight I want to talk about the problem that we know is dragging down our city like a giant albatross. The elephant in the room. The perception of Fall River. Some would like to dismiss it by saying it's not true. Well, we may know it, but the sad reality that in politics and in government, perception is reality. The perception began with our government. Would anyone and could anyone trust our government? The sad reality is that the perception did spread to our citizens. News stations, print media, even the Lieutenant Governor of Rhode Island implied that there's something wrong with you and I, and that because we allowed this to happen. I know that you, the honest, hardworking taxpayers of this community, do not deserve this attention. Our city, a city where many immigrants came and made their life with hard work and perseverance, is not deserving of being condemned because of the actions of few. So tonight I want you to know that I'm going to do everything within my power to bring back honest, transparent, and accountable government. 2 years ago, or the last 2 terms, you gave me the opportunity to serve as your city councilor. It's been a tremendous responsibility and something that I've enjoyed very much. On November 5th, you are going to the ballot to cast your vote. You're accepting your responsibility. Tonight, every night, and every day, for as long as I have the opportunity to serve the city, I'm going to accept my responsibility to you, to be your voice, to be your advocate, and to be your city councilor. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Camara.
Again, thank you, FRC media and panelists, and particularly you, the voters, who are paying attention to this election. I've been called by some as the voice of logic and reason, and I've sometimes been criticized for standing alone. I think it might go back to my days as a son of a grocer, a pioneer grocer, independent grocer, and we stood up to the big box stores and we did well and survived. I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. When I came back to Fall River after college, I did exactly what we tell our graduates from Durfee to do and other high schools, to come back to your community and give back to your community to make it the best community that it can be. And that's what I've dedicated my life to. So whether in public office or out of public office, I've always been a community activist first, trying to bring better government to our community. I do believe Fall River is New England's next great city. I think we have all the potential to make that happen. I not only consider and am flattered by those who consider my positions to be logical and supportive of reason, but I do it with a sense of optimism because I do think that Fall River's best days are ahead. Respectfully, I ask for a vote for Steve Camara. No yard signs, no bumper stickers promote my campaign. It's word of mouth, people talking to people. Respectfully, I ask for your vote on November 5th.
Thank you. Mr. Cole.
So thank you to our moderator, Keith, and our media panel. Thank you to the attendees in the audience and to the folks watching at home. I want to echo another point here. I want to say thank you to all of the candidates here, the candidates that also were debating earlier tonight, because, you know, having been through this my first time and having done quite a bit, this is a tough job. Campaigning is not easy. And so everybody here has earned my respect by showing up. So a vote for Tim Cole is a vote to turn ideas into action. I want to expand the tax base, not the tax rate. I want free cancer screenings for our Fall River firefighters. I want net school spending plus every year. I want to see more police officers on duty. I want to put a homeless volunteer to work program into place. I'd like to see supportive pathways for our opioid addicts, and I want to see best practices in our boards and commissions as well. I'm running on my resume. I'm asking you to vote for me because of my proven integrity, professionalism, and vision, or because of my experience working with government on projects like the South Coast Rail, the First Step In project, homeless shelter, the Block Island offshore wind farm, for example. Please vote for me, Tim Cole, because I am a volunteer and board member in the community, or because I have worked as a banker, an economist, and a strategic planner. But mostly, I'd like you to vote for me so that I can help Fall River invest, grow, and share for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all the candidates and our panelists for being here tonight. Special thanks to our FRC media staff, Steve Rice, Michelle Dumas, Denise Pumaguaye, and Lucy Cabral. I also want to thank Sean Elliott and his staff here at Bristol Community College for hosting tonight's forum. You can watch a replay of this forum and find out more about all the candidates running in the race by tuning into FRC Media Channel 95 or our website, frcmedianews.org. Also, we'd like you to join us on election night as we work with our colleagues at FRG-TV to provide election coverage of the results. So for all of us here tonight, thank you. Please vote. Have a good night.